At the far end we made a little fire and lay round it in the shadow of a big boulder. Maloney stopped his humming suddenly and turned to his companion. "And what do you make of it all?" he asked abruptly. "In the first place," replied John Silence, making himself comfortable against the rock, "it is of human origin, this animal. It is undoubtedly lycanthropy." His words had the effect precisely of a bombshell. Maloney listened as though he had been struck. "You puzzle me utterly," he said, sitting up closer and staring at him. "Perhaps," replied the other, "but if you'll listen to me for a few moments, you may be less puzzled at the end. Or more. Depends on how much you know. Let me go further and say that you have underestimated or miscalculated the effect of this primitive wild life upon all of you." "In what way?" asked the clergyman, bristling a trifle. "It is strong medicine for any town-dweller, and for some of you it has been too strong. One of you has gone wild." He uttered these last words with great emphasis. "Gone savage," he added, looking from one to the other. Neither of us found anything to reply. "To say that the brute has awakened in a man is not a mere metaphor always," he went on presently. "Of course not. But, in the sense I mean, may have a very literal and terrible significance," pursued Dr. Silence. "Ancient instincts that no one dreamed of, least of all their possessor, may leap forth." "Atavism can hardly explain a roaming animal with teeth and claws and sanguinary instincts," interrupted Maloney with impatience. "The term is of your own choice," continued the doctor equably, "not mine. And it is a good example of a word that indicates a result while it conceals the process. But the explanation of this beast that haunts your island and attacks your daughter is of far deeper significance than mere atavistic tendencies, or throwing back to animal origin, which I suppose is the thought in your mind." "You spoke just now of lycanthropy," said Maloney, looking bewildered and anxious to keep to plain facts, evidently. "I think I have come across the word, but really, it can have no actual significance today, can it? These superstitions of medieval times can hardly—" He looked round at me with his jolly red face, and the expression of astonishment and dismay on it would have made me shout with laughter at any other time. Laughter, however, was never farther from my mind than at this moment, when I listened to Dr. Silence, as he carefully suggested to the clergyman the very explanation that had gradually been forcing itself upon my own mind. "However medieval ideas may have exaggerated the idea is not of much importance to us now," he said quietly, "when we are face to face with a modern example of what, I take it, has always been a profound fact. For the moment let us leave the name of any one in particular out of the matter, and consider certain possibilities." We all agreed with that, at any rate. There was no need to speak of Sangree or of anyone else until we knew a little more. "The fundamental fact in this most curious case," he went on, "is that of the double of a man." "You mean the astral body? I've heard of that, of course," broke in Maloney, with a snort of triumph. "No doubt," said the other, smiling, "no doubt you have. That this double or fluidic body of a man, as I was saying, has the power under certain conditions of projecting itself and becoming visible to others. Certain training will accomplish this, and certain drugs likewise. Illnesses, too, that ravage the body may produce temporarily the result that death produces permanently, and let loose this counterpart of a human being and render it visible to the sight of others. Every one, of course, knows this more or less today. But it is not so generally known, and probably believed by none who have not witnessed it, that this fluidic body can, under certain conditions, assume other forms than human, and that such other forms may be determined by the dominating thought and wish of the owner. For this double, or astral body, as you call it, is really the seat of the passions, emotions, and desires in the physical economy. It is the passion body, and in projecting itself it can often assume a form that gives expression to the overmastering desire that molds it. For it is composed of such tenuous matter that it tends itself readily to the molding by thought and wish. "I follow you perfectly," said Maloney, looking as if he would much rather be chopping firewood elsewhere and singing. "And there are some persons so constituted," the doctor went on with increasing seriousness, "that the fluid body in them is but loosely associated with the physical. Persons of poor health as a rule, yet often of strong desires and passions. And in these persons it is easy for the double to dissociate itself during deep sleep from their system, and driven forth by some consuming desire to assume an animal form and seek the fulfillment of that desire. There in broad daylight I saw Maloney deliberately creep closer to the fire, and heaped the wood on. We gathered into the heat and to each other, and listened to Dr. Silence's voice as it mingled with the swish and whir of the wind about us, and the falling of the little waves. "For instance, to take a concrete example," he resumed, "suppose some young man, with the delicate constitution I have spoken of, forms an overpowering attachment to a young woman, yet perceives that it is not welcomed, and is man enough to repress its outward manifestations. In such a case, supposing his double be easily projected, the very repression of his love in the daytime would add to the intense force of his desire when released in deep sleep from the control of his will, and his fluidic body might issue forth in monstrous or animal shape, and become actually visible to others. And if his devotion were dog-like in its fidelity, yet concealing the fires of a fierce passion beneath, it might well assume the form of a creature that seemed to be half dog, half wolf." "A werewolf, you mean?" cried Maloney, pale to the lips as he listened. John Silence held up a restraining hand. "A werewolf," he said, "is a true psychical fact of profound significance, however absurdly it may have been exaggerated by the imaginations of a superstitious peasantry in the days of unenlightenment. For a werewolf is nothing but the savage and possibly sanguinary instincts of a passionate man scouring the world in his fluidic body, his passion body, his body of desire. As in the case at hand, he may not know it." "It is not necessarily deliberate, then?" Maloney put in quickly, with relief. "It is hardly ever deliberate. It is the desires released in sleep from the control of the will finding a vent. In all savage races it has been recognized and dreaded, this phenomenon styled werewolf. But today it is rare, and it is becoming rarer still, for the world grows tame and civilized, emotions have become refined, desires lukewarm, and few men have savagery enough left in them to generate impulses of such intense force, and certainly not to project them in animal form." "By Gad!" exclaimed the clergyman breathlessly, and with increasing excitement. "Then I feel I must tell you what has been given to me in confidence, that Sangree has in him an admixture of savage blood, of Red Indian ancestry. Let us stick to our supposition of a man as described." The doctor stopped him calmly. "And let us imagine that he has in him this admixture of savage blood, and further that he is wholly unaware of his dreadful physical and psychical infirmity, and that he suddenly finds himself leading the primitive life together with the object of his desires, with the result that the strain of the untamed wild man in his blood—" "Red Indian, for instance," from Maloney. "Red Indian, perfectly," agreed the doctor. "The result, I say, that this savage strain in him is awakened and leaps into passionate life. What then?" He looked hard at Timothy Maloney, and the clergyman looked hard at him. "The wild life such as you lead here on this island, for instance, might quickly awaken his savage instincts, his buried instincts, and with profoundly disquieting results." "You mean his subtle body, as you call it, might issue forth automatically in deep sleep, and seek the object of its desire?" I said, coming to Maloney's aid, who was finding it more and more difficult to get words. "Precisely. Yet the desire of the man remaining utterly unmalefic, pure and wholesome in every sense." "Ah!" I heard the clergyman gasp. "The lover's desire for union run wild, run savage, tearing its way out in primitive untamed fashion, I mean, continued the doctor, striving to make himself clear to